Now, what I want to do now is I want to take a look at something that Paul says in 1 Corinthians. Now, I mentioned that this idea of weakness versus strength comes from 1 Corinthians. We'll get there in just a minute. But in the second chapter, I think it's in the second verse, Paul says that when I was among you, you Corinthians, when I was in Corinth with you, I determined to know nothing except for Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Okay? That's how central to Paul's theology the cross was. And so he says, I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus and Him crucified. That was my focus. And he says in chapter 1 that the cross is a stumbling block and foolishness. In other words, to the Greeks, the cross is foolishness because it just flies in the face of all conventional wisdom, certainly in the face of all conventional Greek philosophy. And to the Jew, it's a stumbling block because they don't understand how their Messiah could be crucified, how God could die. It's just something that they cannot get past. They trip over that idea every time. And Paul says the cross is weakness and it's folly. But Paul doesn't say, but let me put a better spin on it for you. But instead, Paul leans into that and says, but the weakness of God is stronger than the power of men. The foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men, right? And so Paul is absolutely about embracing the cross, but not just as a symbol of power, but as a symbol of weakness. Paul is all about leaning into the cross as the ultimate expression of what the kingdom is like. And if you ever read the Gospels and Jesus' kingdom sayings in the Gospels, you know that the kingdom of God is an ironic kingdom, right? It's an ironic kingdom, which makes sense because the king died. He was put to death by capital punishment. He was executed by the state. He was crucified. He was nailed to a cross, okay? So what better symbol is there for an ironic kind of kingdom than an instrument of death, an instrument of suffering, a cross, okay? Now, the cross is central to the theme of exile because, as we said, I think in our introductory talk on this topic of exile and empire, I highlighted the fact that under the Old Covenant, under the Mosaic Covenant, and we're going to talk more about Moses in a little bit here, the covenant curse that was threatened against Israel for disobedience was constantly exile. God would always say, look, I'm going to give you this land, and I want you to obey my commandments, and you'll be prosperous if you do. If you don't, I'm going to send a foreign army to take you captive and take you away and turn you into captives and exiles in a foreign land, right? And so that was the consummate covenant curse under Moses. But that was only a type because the entire Mosaic economy was typological, okay? It wasn't literal. That's the problem with Christian nationalism and Zionism today, and I hope to do a series, perhaps after this series, on the topic of Christian nationalism and eschatology. But the problem is they take it literally, and so they understand Israel and the land to refer to an actual parcel of real estate in the Middle East, and they utterly and completely misunderstand and misrepresent the entire thing, right? Moses was typological of Christ, the antitype. Now, when it comes to the theme of exile, even in that famous Psalm 22, from which Jesus derived his cry of dereliction, my God, why have you forsaken me? That is how Psalm 22 opens. So when Jesus said that on the cross, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit as well. When Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me, as he was dying, he's quoting Psalm 22. And even in Psalm 22, it says that I have been cut off from the land of the living, right? Which sounds a lot like exile. And that's why the cross is just a type, the exile is a type of the cross. That's why Paul says, anyone who's under the law, speaking about the Mosaic covenant, the Mosaic economy, is under a curse, for as it is written, cursed is anyone who is hanged from a tree. Okay? So, the cross is that which was foreshadowed by exile. Exile was a covenant curse, and that is the covenant curse, according to Paul, that Christ suffered in his crucifixion.